Okay, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another brand new Rugby Muscle podcast. I'm your host, as always, TJ, and there is no guest today. We are back once again, I'm sort of touching base with you guys, but I'll be answering a question, and that's something that I want to do a lot more of with a new series as the summer sort of kicks into gear and we kick into a potential rugby season that might be happening. I know you guys will be having lots of questions, so rather than do the long form Q&As, we'll start to get into slightly smaller, more digestible, just single question answers that will be coming your way in the podcast feed, and in the YouTube channel, which if you're here right now, you should please feel free to subscribe. Boom. Look at that. Don't forget to subscribe. Of course, if you're on the podcast, don't forget to subscribe to both, of course. And if you want a free consultation, or if you want to win a free month of Team Rugby Muscle, which is world-class rugby strength and conditioning, delivered straight to you in your inbox with lots of not just a training program, but lots of mindset education, lots of stuff going on there, really good stuff inside the Rugby Muscle Academy, then all you have to do is give us a 5-star review, and I'll be looking to hook some of you guys up with that. So on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. Type up what you think of the podcast. I get regular emails and Instagram DMs from people telling me how much they've enjoyed it. And I'm like, well, have you given us a review? And they're like, oh, no, let me go do that. And then they get a free consultation, or they get a free month of Team Rugby Muscle. So if you're listening and you haven't done that yet, please do so. Otherwise, just enjoy this content. Ask any questions. Let me see if I can pull up another thing that's going to say, ask questions in the comments below. But before we get into that question, I want to make some sort of announcement, I guess. If you have been following the podcast and been following the Rugby Muscle YouTube channel for some time, you know that I'm not a big fan of sponsors, particularly supplement sponsors or clothing sponsors. I just think that they're not worth the time or the hassle, especially on the back end that they get me when people end up following through and the quality isn't quite what it's got to be there. I need to only be sponsored by companies, products that I really trust in. So with that in mind, rugby season is coming up, bars are opening up, and it's time for you and all of us to properly start taking care of ourselves. And I'm not going to be beating around the bush here, because there shouldn't be anything to beat around, because we have been sponsored now by Manscape.com. Manscaped have now launched in the UK, so everyone has access to high quality male grooming. Basically, I can say what I want about this product because they shipped us one and they want us to be completely honest. Look at how cool this box is, by the way. It comes in a beautiful box. It's almost like it's an Apple product. It's very well taken care of. I'm not going to do that because I've already opened it and used it. Look at this bad boy right here. It is the lawnmower is absolutely a fantastic contraption. It's waterproof, so you can use it in the shower. You can keep it clean in all senses. You can just take care of yourself. You're not using the same shaver to shave your face and your nether region. I think it's something that is imperative for guys these days, especially, like I said, even if you've been sleeping on your own for forever, maybe you're just, you don't want to get that shit from the boys about having that big hairy bush. You want to let your boy stand there loud and proud with no bush hiding around it or covering it up, should I say. It makes sure that you can keep it clean, not just because it's in the shower, but in terms of like nicking yourself, which is the fucking worst. So get around that. And in fact, get around the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0 or even the 3.0, and you can get it now for 20% off and free delivery by using the code Rugby Muscle at checkout. It also helps support the Rugby Muscle brand, but more importantly, it helps support your brand, your personal everything. If you use the lawnmower from the guys at Manscaped, and use the code RugbyMuscle at checkout to get yourself 20% off and free delivery. And that works. That code is good both in the UK and the US. Like I said, they're trying to really branch out and really help everyone take care of their own male grooming. It is now solved. We're all sorted. Thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring the show. And thank you guys for using the Rugby Muscle code at checkout and supporting the show. Now, after that, let's actually get into the question, shall we? And it comes in from, I'm going to have to pause this and look him up. It comes from Tom Reese 09, who says, macros for players. It's actually not a question, it's a statement with a question mark behind it. But I get what you want. I think you want to understand what macros rugby players should be eating. And this is a good start to, and a good place to start our nutrition series, and getting everyone to understand what rugby nutrition is and should be looking like for rugby players versus, general health people and whatever. So there are a few different things that go into it, but I do like to start with macros because it's a very good starting base, because everything is encompassed by macros in terms of that is going to be the main dictator of your success or failure on any given diet. And I always come back to tracking, because it is a fine balance. Now, if you're interested in fat loss or muscle gain, we've done a series on both of those things, both in terms of your training and your nutrition, which I'll link in the description below. So go watch either one of those if that is your concern. Otherwise, this one is going to be talking about overall general macros for rugby players under consideration. So, like I say, I always come back to tracking, because it's that fine balance of nutrition in general is such a fine balance, because if you have too many calories consistently, you're going to put on unnecessary weight. And that is just going to inhibit you of your performance, because it will be like you're trying to play your game with a weighted vest. Not only is it going to fatigue you faster in terms of your conditioning, it's also going to make you somewhat less agile, less fast, because you've just got more mass to move around. And you'll be able to you'll have to feel heavier as you're moving around the field for 80 plus minutes. So not a good thing to end up chronically eating too many calories. Likewise, it's also not a good thing to be chronically under eating, because you're then going to hamstring the recovery that you can make from your training. If you're hamstringing the recovery that you can make for your training, you're also then going to be subsequently in future sessions hamstringing your performance, and therefore hamstringing the amount of adaptation that you can make. So you're holding yourself back from the gains, right? If you're completely and constantly under recovered. So it's always a good idea to know be accurate as you can to begin with, but really have a good idea of where your calories are at. So I think first things first, that is the most important thing that everyone should be doing fairly regularly. You don't have to be tracking all the time, but at least to start with, I think you need to be tracking to get a good idea of where your calories, carbs, protein, fats are at. After a while, especially if you're eating the same foods day in, day out, and if you're eyeballing quantities and it's pretty much the same stuff day in, day out, week in, week out, and your weight is trending in the direction that you want, everything's happening how you want, then you're fine to probably stop tracking from there. There's no need to be doing that, as particularly if you have no real body weight goal, whether you're trying to gain weight or lose weight. I think for the most part you can take some time off of tracking. That would absolutely be fine, but that would be after a good period of tracking and knowing that your weight is trending in the right direction, that your food is where it needs to be. Now, where does your food need to be? What sort of where should your calorie intake be? Because that's what we're going to set to begin with, because carbs, protein, and fat are all sources of calories that the body uses in different ways. So the most important thing is, if we're looking at as our macros as three sections of a pie chart, our calories are going to be how big that pie chart is to begin with. And that is massively, massively individual. I cannot set that for you on this YouTube video, on this podcast. It just isn't going to happen. It just, because we have so many differences in our size, in our goals, in our activity, so in how much calories we need in terms of a day in, day out, and even an average. some people can be on their feet for most of the day. Some people can be sat doing, particularly during lockdown. Like for me personally, I was very inactive. Now I'm training kind of at least twice a day, either with jiu-jitsu or with weights or with running, or if I'm on my feet doing rugby coaching now, I'm out a lot. I'm on my feet a lot. And therefore, the calories that I have to now intake are greatly higher, even though I'm not trying to gain the weight that I was before. So it changes, not even just person to person and body weight to body weight, but the same person in different situations over time. So really, there's no fucking use in me telling you how many calories you need to eat, or even giving you a calculation, because there's so many different things that will go into that calculation. Now, what I've done is I've gone one better. The Rugby Muscle Macro Calculator is also linked in the description below, or linked in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast. Click that. You'll be able to get linked to a Google Sheet that you can copy, create your own, make that edit, and you'll be able to figure out exactly how many calories by either in pounds or not pounds, by your body weight in pounds or kilograms. If you enter that stuff, you can use imperial metric, whether you're bulking or cutting or whether you want to stay the same. You have a projection, an idea of how many calories. Even then, that is just a starting point. The idea with the calculator is that you would use that to get a starting point, have a go, see where your weight reacts to from that, and then adjust accordingly. And if you're gaining weight when you shouldn't be, then you would adjust those calories down. You've the prediction has gone wrong on that end. Or if you're losing weight when you're not trying to be losing weight, same thing. You would add in calories because your prediction's gone off or whatever. So, like I say, even with a somewhat complex Google Sheet with like multiple calculations going in there, it still is just an estimate. So there's no use me saying the calories, but use that macro calculator to figure out the calories. Go from there and adjust however you need to. Now, with protein, you might notice with that calculator, it's quite high. And I really do believe in quite high protein, particularly for rugby athletes, higher than most people will be recommending, because I really do think that you need to be covering your bases, and you can, like, as an athlete, like, you're training, you're doing physical things that you need to repair tissue from. So, if you're just a rugby player, you'll be sprinting, you'll be running around, you'll be exerting yourself in a quite a heavy way, and that's before we've even talked about the lifting and the other training. All that stuff will need repair. On top of that, your body needs to repair from the collisions, like literal bruising, literal stuff that is breaking down, bruises and stuff which is breaking down the tissue. You need to repair that with protein. Protein is how you build that up, and so you need to go quite high on the protein. If you want to grow, then you might even need to repair even more, right? So you might even need even more protein. You're not even just repairing to get back the stuff that's broken. You're looking to repair and then add extra mass on top of that. So that needs to come from somewhere, and that somewhere is protein. You'll hear protein be called building blocks a lot of the time, and for me, it kind of works. I like to use that analogy, but I've got another one, so bear with me. If you want analogies about buildings, about construction, and how they sort of work with macros, go watch the muscle building series, because that does sort of touch on that quite well. But I think rather than saying that the protein is a building blocks, like I said in the muscle gain series, it's actually more like the muck, the glue, the thing that glues those bricks together, because you can make the mix, and your body then uses that mix to actually build that building, right? But it doesn't matter how much muck you have. Like, you just need to make sure that you've always got enough to build. If you have too much, it doesn't mean you can build faster, right? Because you're held back by the bricks, by the workers doing it, and all that other stuff. And if you have too much, it actually ends up being a waste, because that muck then dries and you cannot use it. Same thing with the protein, kind of, because the body will just piss it out if you have too much protein, and it ends up being kind of useless. I've learned that the hard way, and even though I say this protein is fairly, like, this protein that you'll get through the Rugby Muscle Macro Calculator is kind of high. It's also not as much as like a lot of bodybuilding and protein supplement companies and all these sources of information might recommend. I've
fallen for that. I've gone the wrong way there. I've had like so much protein. I've dialed my protein kind of way back, particularly as I don't eat meat. And I've found it made no difference, right? And even then, since bringing it back down, I've been tempted, and I've gone higher a little bit. I've not really noticed much of a difference. I've not really been lower much. I should say I set mine at around 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, and actually I use 2 grams per kilogram of total body weight, and I'll ramp it up maybe sometimes in hypertrophy phases, just because I'm going so high on the calories when I do put in a good hypertrophy phase, that I don't really want to be eating like potato sandwiches. I'd rather get some protein in there, so I'll put the protein a little bit higher. I want to make sure that I'm really covering my bases, because the whole point of a hypertrophy phase is to gain as much muscle as possible. I don't really want to be holding myself back by potentially omitting some protein. And when you're in a calorie surplus, you kind of have that luxury, in my opinion. I was going to say that I've also tried going lower, but to be honest, I find it kind of hard, because it's ingrained within me to have a decent portion of protein at every meal. So maybe I will experiment with lower protein at some point in the future. But again, that might not be a good reference for rugby players, because I'm no longer suffering from the collisions and the physical nature of rugby competition. Yes, I'm grappling, but there's no real impact like there is in a game of rugby that will cause that disruption, that will need to be repaired by protein. So in summary, around 2 grams per kilogram of body weight for protein. This is set after your calories, but it's set before fats and protein. It's really important to make sure that before fats and carbohydrates. It's really important to make sure that you're getting enough protein once you figured out how many calories. And having more is not necessarily better. Having less is not necessarily better. You just need to make sure you're eating enough, and it doesn't really, in my opinion, change whether you're in a fat loss or a muscle gain phase, unless you're someone that just wants to hold on to or gain as much muscle as possible, and then there's potential to add in more protein. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense so far. We'll wrap this up, or we won't wrap this up, but we'll finish off this calorie discussion with the other side of the coin. So we've got our protein, we've got our calories. Now the rest of those calories are going to be coming from fats or carbohydrates. And the reason I'm saying it like that is because they cannot be set independently. You can't just set your fat number and then set your carb number, because they are filling up. Like, you've got your calorie allotment, you've got your protein allotment, and you need to then however much carbs you have, you then have to account the fats for the same thing. So the higher the fats, the lower the carbs need to be, and vice versa. Since the calorie goal is already set, protein goal is already set, so you've only got a certain amount of calories for both fats and carbs. So it's not, you can't just have high carb, high fat, high protein. That doesn't make sense. It's all medium, right? Because it's within the realm of how many calories you have. It's a thing that people don't still seem to grasp in their head. So both fats and carbs are the fuel sources. They can't do the jobs that protein does, but protein can weirdly do the job that fats and carbs do. That's too much information. You don't need to worry about that. The reality is that fats are easier to store as fat because, guess what? They are fat. And if we want to use the fats as energy, which they can be used as energy sources, like I say, both fats and carbs are energy sources, they need to be converted kind of to carbs, whereas carbs are already there, ready to be utilized. So from this introduction, you should understand that, like, my preference is to maximize the amount of carbohydrates that you have, because that is the energy source that you want to perform at your best, to recover. If your body is using energy, for the most part, it's going to be, no matter what, unless you're in ketosis, which you don't need to be in ketosis, your body is going to utilize glycogen for energy, which it comes from carbohydrates. So even if you're using fats for the energy, the body has to go through this process, which is somewhat laborious, to convert the fats into carbohydrates and then finally into energy from there that the body can use. So if you want to maximize energy, you want to go on the lower end of fats and the higher end of carbohydrates. But just beware, if you do that, the lower that you set the carbohydrate, the fat level, using the calculator, bearing in mind that you're not setting your fat to complete nothing, because the fats are important. You need a minimum amount of fats for hormone control and to help the body function efficiently. But once you, again, it's sort of like protein in that way, that once you've got enough, more isn't necessarily better. After that, it's just all about your energy. And so therefore, once you've got your minimum, you want to then from there try and maximize the amount of carbohydrate you get from there. But reality is that this ends up being more of a personal preference question than it does a performance question, because it can become really awkward if your fat is like too low, especially if your carbs are real mega high. It means you have to constantly be eating like low fat alternative foods. Or I remember a point when I was in my muscle gaining phase last year where I couldn't really eat too many oats, because oats end up being too high in fat compared to like your rice. And so I'd have cream of rice, and which is delicious, by the way, but it just ends up being a bit of an inconvenience. And if you eat out a lot, if you're eating with family and stuff, it just ends up being a lot more hassle than it is worth. It's just easier to push that fat number a little bit higher, because if you're constantly, even if you say in theory, okay, it doesn't matter, I'm going to really try and do this the best. If you don't end up hitting your numbers, and if you're constantly missing out on your numbers, that can be really demotivating and stop you from being consistent. So in theory, higher carbs, lower fat within the numbers that you can get from the Rugby Muscle Macro Calculator are going to be best. But the reality is, it's more about your lifestyle and your personal preference. And then over time, maybe you can make those adjustments. But speaking of which, it might be an even better idea and a more convenient idea if consistency is something that holds you back. And if you've never really stuck with like this macro calculator thing, you found it too awkward, particularly you've not hit your fat numbers enough, or you've gone too low or too high on your fat, a good idea would be just to set yourself a protein goal and a calorie goal. Because like I've already said, both the fats and the carbohydrates are sort of interchangeable. So, if you're low on carbs but you're high on fat, the body can still use that fat for energy, and vice versa. It can just be as long as you've got enough fat, it can just be a really good workaround to sort of suit your lifestyle. Make sure you're eating enough calories, make your tracking a lot easier, make your whole process a lot easier, and really just get you focusing on eating enough energy and also eating enough protein. And this works fantastic for beginners, but only once they wrap their head around it. Like, too many people don't get it. They're like, oh, okay, but what if I've gone over on my carbs? And I'm saying, well, you just go low on your fat. Okay, but what about my calories? I'm like, well, then that will take care of your calories. Your goal is your protein number, your fat. I mean, damn it, I don't help the process when I mess up my words like that. So it's your protein number, your calorie number, and from there you're set, right? You've got enough energy for the body, you've got enough protein to help with all the recovery and training process and building processes that you want. You're good to go. Once you've wrapped your head around that, you can then, and you've got consistent with your calories, you can then sort of tweak your foods so that you can look for potentially to see if you feel better, higher carbohydrate, lower fat food, which will then help you provide energy for your training and your recovery, as long as that fits your lifestyle. And if it doesn't really matter, because it doesn't make too much of a difference. So there you have it. Macros for players explained. Cliff notes once more. Make sure you're getting in enough calories, but if you're getting in too many, then you'll end up chronically overeating, putting on unnecessary weight and compromising your performance. Make sure you get enough protein. You can go higher to a point if you really want to maximize the amount of muscle that you have, but for the most part, it isn't always going to be necessary, but you've got to make sure that you get enough. And then carbs and fats are somewhat interchangeable. In an ideal world, you're going to go higher on the fats and lower on the carbs. The low end of carbs, by the way, would probably be something like 1 gram, maybe a little bit less per kilogram of body weight. You want to make sure you get in that much fat, but at least. And then again, from there, you're going to allot the rest of your calories between however your body finds it, or however your lifestyle finds it convenient to eat your carbohydrates and your fats. In an ideal world, high carbohydrate is going to be better, but if it doesn't suit your lifestyle, that doesn't matter too much. And in the next video, we'll be talking a lot more about eating around your training. So whether you are really concerned about recovery or you're really concerned about performance, we'll get into that one in the next video. If you've made it all the way to the end, please give us a thumbs up. Let us know any questions that you have in the comments below. I'll either break them down for a long video here or answer it in a Q&A, or we'll get into it with Alex when he comes on the podcast. Support the podcast by clicking on any links below or checking out manscaped.com and getting yourself 20% off and free delivery with the code Rugby Muscle at checkout. Like I say, 5-star reviews, all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next one.